The Complete Natural Food Retailer's Workshop with Danny Wells. Tape number 2.
So those are the industry numbers. The other numbers that are important is when we look at our profit and loss statements to find out what are the industry averages compared to our own. First thing I do in a store evaluation when they have me come in and try to improve their store is to look at their profit and loss statement and evaluate it and say how are we doing compared to the industry average. So if you've got a 1,000 square foot store less, or 1,000 to 4,000, or 4,000 above, these are industry averages that you can look at and see, now how am I doing compared to these other stores? And some important things to look at is make sure your gross profit margins are in line, because if your gross profit margins are not in line, that's the first place we look. If you're not making money, maybe our margins aren't correct. Number two, maybe we're paying too much rent. Very common here. I have people that open places and their rent is 9 to 10, 12% of sales. Of course, we're not going to make money when the industry average is 4 or 5% if we have to pay 2 to 3 times the amount for rent. And another thing we can look at is payroll. That's a part that is extremely important and is very controllable. That our payroll should be, if we're a small to medium-sized store, no more than 16 to 18%. But some of our stores are up to 22, 24%.
Well, when you speak of payroll, are you including benefits?
That's everything. These numbers include everything. That's benefits. That's benefits. Now the payroll generally in a small store is like you have to kind of divide this up. If you're talking a 1,000 square foot store, you usually don't consider the owner's salary as part of that. I mean, you take, that's basically your other, and the owner's salary is what he makes. But when you've got a larger store, all salaries are taken out of this, and that should be, payroll should be essentially included in that, and your benefits, and your FICA, and your taxes, and all that should essentially go. Yes?
How do you count funds compared with this payment date?
With the Australian, I just pulled out the sheet because I didn't think I'd have it asked here, but I have a comparative sheet on Australia, and if you specifically wanted, I'm in booth number 801 throughout the show. If you want to come to the booth, give me your card, I'll be happy to mail you that sheet that compares it to the Australia and New Zealand markets. Generally, Australia's economy is pretty suppressed right now, and they've got a real problem, but their overall gross profit margins are lower. Yeah, and Australians' occupancy costs are higher. Australia usually around 10%. They are much higher than ours here. Wages, you can see down here, are just basically industry averages for your full, part-time, and your different managers, so you can just get an idea if you're falling within the range there or not, and these are just kind of averages. I will tell you that the better stores, in wages, we find that we pay better and we have less people working for us. Most of us in the industry are overemployed. This is a pretty much common fact, that we are overemployed because we don't have the productivity level up to where it should be. And as a result, in the stores that are doing a better job, for instance, in our store that we had a 10% bottom line, a 16% bottom line, our payroll was at 10%. For other than the owner and officers, our payroll was 10%. But of that, our average salary was more like $8 or $9 an hour because we hired fewer people, paid them better. Now, where do we get this kind of information if we don't come to the seminars and we want to keep up on it? There are things that we should be, especially for you that are opening new stores. You want to make sure you're subscribing to all 3 industry magazines, and if you are a cooperative, you want to make sure you're subscribing to Cooperative Grocer. Because these magazines here will each month give you input, and each of them come up once a year with their annual industry surveys, and they'll give you information. Now, realizing that the information coming from our surveys is essentially by unaudited information that's sent in from the stores, so we have to kind of take this with a little bit of grain of salt at times. But we can also learn an awful lot from our own profit and loss statements, our balance sheet, and our customer count. Another thing that I find a lot of stores don't properly take is a customer count. Customer count is something you should be taking track of every day and charging it at least once a month, and we'll show you how to do that. Another area is customer survey. In the advanced workshop, we go into showing you how to do a customer survey and the questions you ask because it takes a little bit more time, but it's a place we can get a lot of information. Other retailers. Many of us are intimidated by the other store in town or the other natural food stores. We look at them as this competition or the bad guy. And really, we're all in this industry, and we're fighting for the dollar from the other industry, the regular food industry. Only 85% of the population only 15% of the population shop in natural food stores regularly. If you're talking about the natural food industry in one word, it's potential. 85% of the population don't even come into our stores. And we wind up bickering about ourselves and worrying about advertising against the other health food store in town when we should be spending more time collectively as an industry to get that other 85% of the people into our stores. So it's better to develop good relationships with other retailers in our field because we can learn from them. Obviously now in this industry too, in the last several years, we have consultants that can come in and also give you more information, give you assistance, which we didn't have before. Wholesalers' velocity reports, an extremely important place for information that all of us should be getting. Anybody who manufactures a product for you or distributes it has what they call a velocity report. And what this is a report that will tell you the ranking of their products by volume, meaning their number one selling product, their number two selling product, their number 3, 4, and so forth. So when you're looking to if a company comes to you and wants to have you put in a line of vitamins, and it's got 80 products, say, I'd like to look at your velocity report. And you may find the top 10 selling products nationwide and say, well, let's start with the top 10. Instead of, throwing a dart and making it a throw of the dice, you know now what are the top selling products. We get into this more and give you an example of how to do that when we get into buying and selling. Now, right now we're involved in, and this is a new overhead that you don't have there because we happen to be involved in the tails of a recession here, and some of us are still feeling it kind of strongly. The types of things that we should look at generally in industry, in retail, during a recession. And one is, during a recession, we don't spend dollars on anything that won't produce dollars. A recession is not the time to buy new desks, new computers, new cars, and things like that. If we are if we are in a cash crunch, where we do want to make sure we don't cut back is on advertising. Because more people are competing for the dollar out there. There are less dollars available to be had, and so the place we do want to make sure that we're putting the dollar out is for advertising. In our advertising, in our in-store, we want to stress quality, value. This is not a time to market luxury or convenience, because people are willing to sacrifice luxury and convenience, and they want quality and value during a recession. This is a time to try to eliminate your slow sellers, to clean out those products that are not selling. This is a time to try new products, because many people, even if they can't afford to go on a vacation this year because the money's a little tight, if they can buy something new, during a recession, the clothing industry actually does better. They increase their sales because people, to make themselves feel good, they'll go out and buy a new outfit or a new shirt. And so clothing sales are up during this recessionary time. And so we're kind of vying for that feel-good dollars. And so if we can make them feel good by having some new products, yes, I'll try this new aloe vera facial cream or this new anti-wrinkle cream or this new vitamin that'll make me feel better and peppier or whatever, then chances are, okay, I deserve it. I'm going to go for it. So point of purchase becomes extremely important. We're going to spend about an hour on merchandising to show you how important merchandising our products is. And what point of purchase is that inside your store, we'll show you that 65% of all purchases are made at the retail level. The decision to make those purchases are not made before you come into the store, but at the store. And if our store is properly merchandised and we have point of purchase specials going on and proper merchandising and signs, people will buy more. This is a time also to focus on what we call vertical advertising, meaning that you're going to advertise to your customers already. People who already sold are coming into your store to get them to buy more. There's two ways of increasing your sales. One is by getting new people in the store, and the second is to get the people who already come in your store to buy more product. And so the idea is to focus on that type of advertising and eliminate stagnant departments. This is a time to look at that juice bar that's not pulling in any money, or the lunch counter that's not making you any money, that's a drag, and to say, we're going to get rid of this because it's costing us money to have it in our store. So after getting all this basic information down about the plan, we're now going to go into step by step of how we go about operating our natural food store. We are at the 1 hour point, so we're going to take a break, and we'll come back with the first commandment. Our break. We're going to go to commandment number 1. Which is, thou shalt make money. Now, a lot of people get mixed up in this. Kind of like the little boy who was down in Mexico and heard how the United States was the land of opportunity and figured, well, I'm just not making it down here in Mexico. I'm going to go up to the United States, and crossed the border, went into the first ranch that he found there in Texas, and knocked on the door and said, sir, I would do anything just for a place to stay and some food. I'll do any kind of work. I'm a good worker. He said, well, we're always short on hands. Sure, I'll give you a try. So here's a bucket of paint and a paintbrush. Go around back and paint my porch. Okay, sir. Thank you. And he says, when you're done, just come back, knock on the door, and we'll check it out. If it's a good job, then I'll hire you. You won't be disappointed. So the young man goes around back. About an hour and a half later, he comes around, knocks on the door, says, I'm all finished. And he says, well, let's go around and take a look and see what it looks like. And he says, but sir, he says, that's not a Porsche, that's a Mercedes. Many of us get mixed up in business because we think that the reason we're in business is to feel good or to make people feel good, and that's fine, we can do that. But when we open a retail establishment, we have to have as a first commandment, basically a profitable interest. Now this is kind of hard for some of us to embrace in the natural food industry. We have trouble with this profit thing, and others of us are looking for the profit because we've never seen any. I found that you can do what you love and make money, or you can do what you love and not make money, and it's much more enjoyable to do what you love and make money, as well as being much more beneficial to the entire system. And when you're not profitable, it's a dead-end street for your employees. They don't see anywhere that you can go, so they're not going to hang around that long. The community can see that you're struggling, the landlord sees you struggling, and you don't feel that good about yourself. Now, to make money, we have to do certain things. First thing we have to do is we have to make sure that our cash registers are set up properly. Now, for the larger stores, this is obviously something that's basic for you. And in this workshop, we cover everything from the basic all the way through. So hold with us on this. But I'll tell you, I have worked with stores that are doing over $1 million a year on two keys, taxable and non-taxable. That doesn't tell us anything. We have to know where our sales are coming from. So at least we should have at least a supplement, a grocery, a perishable, and a body care department. And if we want to break down perishable into frozen, dairy, and bakery, that's fine. That's minimum. The optional would be if you want to have an herb, book, appliance, or book, that's fine too. Mandatory, the ones that are starred, if you have a deli, produce, or lunch counter, you must have a separate key. You must have separate accountabilities for these particular keys, especially if you have smaller stores, because these are the areas where you stand to lose the most money. These are the areas that give us the biggest problems in profit because there's a lot of shrink involved. In fact, if you do happen to have a lunch counter, how many of us here have lunch counters or juice bars, something like that? Okay, my condolences. I say that tongue-in-cheek, but I've also said it from experience, that if you are not taking a separate key on your department, then start doing it. And also, you almost have to look at your lunch counter as a completely different business. When you start to look at your lunch counter like a restaurant and think of it like a restaurant, then you can see whether you're making or losing money. But just to pull stuff off your shelves and start selling it off the lunch counter, we won't realize how much money we're losing. I don't know how many stores I go into, and I will say, okay, how are we doing here at the lunch counter juice bar? Oh, we're doing fine, we're making all kinds of money. Are you sure? Oh, yeah, we're busy all the time. I'll sit down and analyze it, find out what their purchases were just for 1 month, and find out in the last year they've been losing $400 a month every month, just like clockwork. Just like clockwork. Didn't know I lost $5,000 last year in the juice bar because you weren't keeping track. So we have to make sure that we keep track of all of our sales and all of our purchases for these items, for these departments separately. If you have produce in your store, you must have a produce key, and then when you on your profit and loss statement, a produce purchases line, so you know exactly what your profit margin is, because this is a very high shrink area. Now it's amazing how even in larger stores, I worked with a store that was doing $5 million a year, and came to me because they were losing $250,000 a year. That's usually a magic number for these stores losing money. But anyway, that's what they were losing. And their biggest losing department was the produce department. They had and they didn't really know it. And they had the highest shrink in that area because the guy thought, well, I have to put jicama in because, I got a customer request jicama. But if you're throwing away 90% of the jicama just to satisfy that one customer, then we don't want jicama. Go back to the first slide. We want to find out what the customer wants, give them more of that, less of what they don't want, specifically in the produce department. Same thing in the deli. One of the individuals that runs a successful deli tells me that don't open a deli unless you have an affinity for pain. It's these type of things, deli, produce, and lunch, actually take produce out for a second, but deli and lunch counter, you are getting involved in preparation and serving of food, and it takes a tremendous amount of restaurateur-type knowledge and thinking as far as portion sizes and weighing things and balances and checks, and too many of us just get in so casually when we have this food service, we don't realize the amount of money we're losing. And also the time we take. Are we really want to be doing mashing an avocado and a pita bread and losing $400 a month doing it when I could be out basically maybe putting on a seminar and increasing my supplement sales or increasing my organic sales somewhere else? That get involved in food service if we know food service, and if we don't, then don't be afraid to get out of it. And one of the things that we do in a lot of stores, smaller stores that we do analysis, we recommend them getting out of food service because it is. In fact, I was in Palm Springs doing a seminar like this, and we had almost a full room, and in the LA area, a lot of food service, health food store combinations are there, and I asked them to raise their hands. How many of you had food service like I did here? And about 25 people raised their hands. Knowing what you know now, I said, how many of you would put in food service today? And not one person raised their hand. In fact, some of the biggest, most famous restaurant and health food store combinations would stand up and say, the food service is 90% of my headache and 5% of my profits. 90% of my headaches and 5% of my profits. And our store was the same thing. Many of us put in food service thinking it's going to be bringing people into our store to buy other products. But you'll know when we did it in our store, and we've had people in other stores do the same thing, that 9 out of 10 people who come into your food service or lunch counter or juice bar will not buy anything else in the store. 9 out of 10. And if you want to check it out, check it out. If those of you at food service and have delis and actually food service lunch counters and things, if you have separate chips that you write up and have them cash it out at the register, when they do, write on the back of each one for a month or two what else they bought in the store. That doesn't include chips or a drink to go along with that, but did they buy something substantial along with it? 9 out of 10 times, they will not. And then you have to decide, is this what you really want to do? So that's the way you set up your registers. Make sure you have sufficient keys to tell you the departments. And then if you're a smaller store, you don't need a computer for this. You can do what we call the 2-page bookkeeping system. One page is your daily sales journal. You can do this by hand. We actually did it by hand until we were doing up to about $1.5 million. And we just got a standard 40-line page here. This was like for January. This was the first. These were the sales, our customer count, and our sales in each department by hand. We total it up at the end of the month, and these totals became the top line of our profit and loss statement for each individual category. And so when we got to the profit and loss statement, this might be a little bit small to read there, but it is in the handbook, is your top section of your profit and loss statement. And a big mistake that we make is when the profit and loss statements that I see, it just says sales or income. It just says one line, total sales. That doesn't tell us anything other than how much people are buying basically of the entire store. But we need to know of each department. Now, why is this important? We already said that we're a trendy industry. And if 20% of our products are moving in and out each year, we want to know which 20% they are. If we look at it by department, and I find by analyzing this month that the grocery sales year-to-date in this month are the same, the dairy and frozen and perishable are the same, bulk sales are the same, 7%, vitamins 40%. These are all consistent, but look, our produce, 7% year-to-date, 9% this month, our produce sales are higher. Well, we may start looking at this and after 4 or 5 months find that, hey, people are buying more produce. What is this telling me? Our customers want more produce? By looking at this in our particular store, I went out and took out an appliance section of the store that wasn't selling as well and increased my produce section because people wanted more produce. So by having these monthly statements, it just takes a few minutes to look at it. You can find out, are you selling more or less within a category, and then how much to order and how much shelf space to give. I know some stores that will wind up having vitamins 20% of their sales, and they might have 80% of their store shelving space is taken up in supplements. Or it should be just the opposite. They've got way too many linear feet of vitamins in the store for the amount of sales, because you want to balance your linear feet of presentation with the total dollars that you are selling within a category. So the second part of your P&L should be your cost of sales, and this again should be by category, so that you'll know that you're buying so much in the dairy category, so much in the grocery, so much in the body care, vitamins, and so forth, and then you can find out in each individual department whether you're making or losing any money. Then you get down to your gross profit margin, and this is something that one of those key numbers that you're going to want to look at each month. You're going to want to see if that gross profit margin is where it belongs, within the range that is healthy for you. Then the rest of your expenses just come off it, and you wind up with your bottom line. Okay. Let me tell you the way that we usually work this, is that you have a beginning inventory that you know is that you took an actual physical inventory. And we'll kind of skip ahead here, but we'll say that if you have a store that's doing less than $200,000 a year, we recommend taking one inventory a year. If you're doing $200,000 to $500,000 a year, then we're going to say take two inventories a year. If you're doing close to $1 million or more, we would recommend quarterly, once a quarter inventory. If you have a problem with your profit or your gross margins, and many of us do, I'll tell you, there's a lot of pilferage going on in this industry. And I've worked in stores where one individual out of the cash register has taken $50,000 in 6 months just by voiding out the receipts after the customers come through. And you have to know immediately, you want to jump on this immediately. So if we get into a situation where our gross profit margin isn't what it's supposed to be, because we know what our markup is, and we know what our gross profit margin should be, then we may have to take inventories once every other week or once a month until we find out where the problem is. And we just don't let it accumulate if those numbers aren't there. I'll get to your question, sir, in just a second. But let me just continue on here. So, but when you take a physical inventory, you get your beginning inventory level. Then you have, unless you take a physical inventory, you can only get this number based on calculations. And so how this works is that, and for those that aren't into accounting, this may get a little bit confusing, if your last time you took a physical inventory, the only time you can actually get your true gross profit margin is when you take a physical inventory. It's the only time, when you have to count your items. You've counted them in January, and you've counted them in June, and that's the time you can find out, okay, this is what I had here, this is all the stuff I sold and bought, and this is what I have left. You can find exactly what your gross profit margin is. And when you find that number, and say it's 38%, which we found out in this store, then that becomes a given. And we use that 38% gross profit margin as an averaging factor, and assuming that we're going to have that same markup, knowing that we start with this inventory, all of our purchases are then taken off of our sales, assuming that we're going to wind up with a 38% gross profit margin, and what becomes X then is the inventory at the end of the period. This becomes a book level, meaning we're going to assume that we sold all our products at the same markup we did the last quarter, and this is the inventory we should have left of $58,000. When we take the physical inventory, that will let us know what our shrink is, because if we take a physical inventory and shows that our book inventory shows that we should have $58,000, and our physical shows that we have $57,000, that means we lost $1,000, and that's our shrink. And when we do that again, then we get our gross profit margin now becomes maybe 37.6%. And we use that number for the next time. Now, if you don't understand all that, an accountant who does this for you knows that's how it works, because they will work it this way every time that they give you a profit loss statement. And this allows them to give you a profit loss statement every month without taking a physical inventory. If you use an inventory control service, an inventory service that takes it for you, if you have a small store, you can usually get it done for about $200. If you have a medium store, you can usually get it done for $300 to $400. If you have a large store, you can get it done for $500 to $600. Depends on the contract you get. Now, we had a contract, and in our store, we had essentially $85,000 worth of retail inventory, and they counted for us twice a year, and they charged us $200 each time. And it was more than worth it to have it done professionally than to do it ourselves. Question?
Is this sample realistic, or is it
That's an actual. This is an
actual store? I mean,
This is an actual store, a healthy store. This is an actual store that's got a 38% gross profit margin, which is pretty healthy in our industry right now.
I'm asking you because he has wages as 3.5% of sales, and he has rent at 0.3% of sales.
Okay, there's two rents, and this should be explained. There's 2 pages of this. And if you look over the extension of rent, you get 4.2% year to date. You look at year to date, 4% of sales. Now, this is one type of wages, and this actually happened to be our store back in 1986 that we had. And on the second page, we also paid some people. The tax laws changed, and you could pay some people on contract to help save taxes. Now you can't do that. These were actually wage employees, and we had some of our key employees that were on contract for tax purposes for them, and it came out to be about 11% of total, 10 to 11%. But that was our actual P&L, yes. We will basically use your actual count. We're not worrying about last in, first out. I mean, you're using the actual physical count. I mean, it doesn't make any difference whether you're using first in or last in counting. I mean, if you're doing a physical count in January and a physical count in June.
So you see the value inventory there is between what you paid for what you got.
Oh, okay.
Your environment, that makes a big difference.
Okay. Let me give you an example. Then when you take inventory, you are taking inventory, and his question essentially was on first in or last in on when you're counting, whether you're basing your price on when you first bought the merchandise or you last bought it because the price changed. If you're in this industry, if you're turning your merchandise like you should, in our particular store, we turn it over 12 times a year, meaning we're turning our inventory once every 30 days. So when we take inventory, it's fresh. It's within 30 days old. So we're taking it at the actual price at the time. Now, you don't take a complete inventory of your entire store altogether. You take it by department. That's the other thing that where people make mistakes is inventorying your entire store. You take it by department. You take an inventory. You want to physically inventory all your bread, all your juices, inventory everything separately because there are different markups in each category, and that way you get an exact, precise dollar amount of what your store inventory is. In fact, we have 7 lines of vitamins. We do each one of those. In fact, we'll get into this inventory in a sheet and explain some of this a little bit better. There was another question. Yeah, when I get through the whole thing, then that'll maybe bring this all in, because inventory is a part of your inventory control, which is something that's component number 2. But while we're still on dollars making money aspect of it, and if it's something you specifically don't understand about the profit and loss statement, also I'll address that. But what a lot of people don't do in this industry is figure out what your true bottom line is, and that is taking your profit and loss statement and then figuring out what your perks or benefits are and adding that to your profit and loss statement. The purpose of having a small business for many of us is for tax benefits, because you can essentially get a car that you can write off or depreciate out of it. You can, if you have children, you can have children that work for you and they can earn up to $3,000 a year without paying taxes on it. And there are a lot of, now tax laws have changed. This again was happened to be one of our own store ones. But you can see, even though our profit and loss statement showed that we had $100,000 profit for that year, we had $49,000 in legally expensed benefits and perks that came to our store through that. Because we had automobiles and trucks that were supplied to both officers, we had medical expenses, it was a corporation and we had an actual medical plan, so if somebody went to a chiropractor or dentist or doctor, the corporation paid for it. The corporation also paid for both of our families' complete medical insurance. We owned all the equipment personally and leased it back to the corporation, so that was a way of getting about $10,000 out of the corporation without having to pay Social Security and taxes. And this is all legal, done through the attorneys and stuff, but these are just ways that you can, and we're not going to get into a long discussion on that, but one of the reasons you do have a business is so that you can have legally expensed benefits and perks to come through to you. So through some aggressive and some smart tax planning, we were able to get about almost $50,000 in perks and benefits from the store, in addition to our $100,000 P&L and the merchandise received. And one of the things that you can take home, any merchandise that's distressed or broken or cracked or that's not sellable. I mean, it's just merchandise that comes back. So, I mean, how many of us, when we have stores, bring back this merchandise? I mean, my kids will always complain, Dad, when are we going to have yogurt in the house that's dated, a month ahead instead of a month behind? And how come we always got to scrape some oil off the cheese to eat it? And, we've been using Origine Herbal Shampoo for 15 years now, just because we got a good deal, convention on it. Well, all this kind of stuff, you can get a lot of merchandise home. And if you happen to, there's a nice bottle of vitamins you happen to actually crack, and oops, I got to take it home now. It's a product that you actually don't have to pay for because it's not a sellable product. So we, by keeping track of that, found that we had between our two families about $15,000 worth of these products that we took home. We actually lived out in our store. That's the benefit. So if you add all this up at the end of the year, you're going to find out what your true bottom line is. And many people don't do this, and they think, I'm not making that much in my store, but maybe you are if you're working those kind of benefits out. So the purpose of reviewing your profit and loss statement each month is to look at your trends. The trend generally in this industry is for food. Even if you're a vitamin-oriented store, people are buying more and more food. Your store may have a different trend, but at least you'll know what that trend is. The trend for supplements, at least if you start going in the mid-'80s and up, and back in 1986, we had 38% of the vitamin market in the United States. 8% of all vitamins were sold in health food stores. In 1987, it went to 21%. In 1988, to 18%. For some reason, the last couple of years, I haven't been able to find these stats. But the overall trend is we are selling less of vitamins generally. We know also that 40 million less Americans are taking vitamins now than they were 10 years ago. And the reason is because they perceive, there's a reason here, 3 reasons. One is people are perceiving that they don't need supplements because they are eating more healthfully. You go back 10 years ago, people would come into a health food store and they still wanted to smoke and drink and eat any garbage they wanted and take vitamin E because they smoked, or take vitamin C because I drank, or take B-complex for my hangover. And people come in a lot for those kind of things. But nowadays, people are wanting to change their diet. They didn't want to change their diet 10 years ago. They just want to take the pill. Now they're willing to change their diet, and the perception is, and I use perception in quotes, perception is that we don't need the supplements as much as we used to. Number 2 is there's been a lot of attacks on our industry, the supplement industry, and they're going to continue. And so this affects our supplement sales too. I mean, tryptophan really took the wind out of our sales. There's no doubt about it. And the FDA they've got their guns cocked and ready to continue shooting. They will always do that. And so we're going to continue to have difficulty with supplements in this industry. And another reason why we really should start getting people converted more on food. I'm for supplements. I mean, I use them and I'm for selling them, but we have to realize the dollar and cents wise is that every time somebody shoots a supplement down, and that we've hinged our whole business on this, it hurts. But they're going to have a hard time, knocking down whole wheat bread. They just won't, they just won't do that. Many retailers don't properly merchandise, advertise, or promote, and this is the key thing because there are still stores that sell a lot of vitamins and a lot of supplements because they know how to promote, they know how to educate their customers, and an educated customer will always buy more. Now, for some of you that get TIGO, and that means the eyes glaze over when you start looking at all these numbers, something like this may help. It helped me because I found it was difficult to look at these charts. These profit loss statements. So I converted it to a chart. And on the office wall, for the 16 years I was in business, we had a chart, and it had our gross sales, and then sales by each department was in a different colored line, and our customer count. And it was like January, February, March, each month of the year. It went on for 16 years across the wall. And so we could tell exactly what our trends were before our eyes. It took me like 2 minutes at the end of each month to take my profit and loss and plot this. Okay, here were our total sales, here were the total supplement sales, grocery, customer count, and draw the line. And so what happened, we could find what seasonally where our changes were. This told us that in August, when everybody's on vacation, to cut down on our perishables because we were throwing everything away in August. But then make sure the first week of September we're ready to order a lot of small 8-ounce Jillers because even though we were throwing them away 2 weeks ago, everybody's back to school and we're going to want them now. So not only would we learn seasonal trends, but it helped us to see general overall trends in our store, and then all of our employees could walk by and when there was, we're selling more of this or less of that, and that's something I should know. You sure can. Correct. Okay. No, fresh foods, well, it can be a big term there, but fresh foods can mean produce, dairy, frozen, refrigerated. Those are the biggest growing category is fresh produce right now. The second biggest growing category in our industry is frozen, followed by your perishable categories. Meaning as compared to something that sits on the shelf. It is considered for this term, yes, it is considered fresh. Now, the deli and prepared foods, now maybe your question is getting into the prepared deli foods, is that, yes, there is a trend for delis, successful delis, in stores that have sufficient traffic or demographics for it. And if your store has sufficient demographics or currently has enough traffic, and we'll get into an overhead that shows you when you ought to put in a deli, when you ought to put in produce and things like that, then we'd say, yes, a deli. In fact, if you are going to go into food service, the type of food service you'd want to go into would not be a lunch counter, would not be a juice bar, would not be a restaurant, but the deli concept is the wisest one to go into because, for one, you can sell 2 meals rather than one. You don't have any seating. So one of the things we do, we remodel stores, now we get rid of all the seating because the seats are only full for 20% of the time, and 80% of the time you have vacant space, which you could be putting product in there to sell. And it encourages people to get their product and get out of the store so you don't get a jam up back at your lunch counter if people sit down and chat. Because when they can sit down and chat, they get $1 worth of product and they get $10 worth of conversation, and it takes up your time. So the deli concept definitely is a trend for larger stores and for stores with the traffic. No doubt about it. After you get all this information on your graph or in your chart, the other thing you want to look at, which we mentioned briefly, was tax planning. I find that rather than paying a high CPA, and CPAs for me don't really do much than they take all my numbers and put them in a fancy packet and charge me $300 or $400 a month to give me a profit and loss statement. And I can go to a computer-generating firm and get a profit and loss statement for $85. And so what I do is I all that money I save by going to a straight computer firm to generate numbers. At the end of the year, I would go to a tax attorney and say, "Look, I don't want to pay taxes." So a lot of them. And so, how in my business, how should I organize it? And they'll sit down and say, "This is what you ought to do." And so by doing that, we were able to essentially get $49,000 worth of perks through our business, which was a considerable tax savings. Incorporating also can help you to limit liability, lower taxes, defer taxes. Laws have changed a lot. I'm not going to get into specifics, but if you're doing more than $500,000 a year, you might want to look at it. Insurance. This comes close to home to me because right after I sold my store to my brother, he had a 1,700 square foot store that was doing about $1.5 million. He took it up to about $2 million, outgrew it, built a brand new 4,000 square foot store, and a month after it was open, an arson burned it down. Now, just before it was burnt down, some individuals came to him from United Grocers and said, "Look, you're a bigger store now, and you might want to look at joining us and in getting our new comprehensive big insurance plan." Compared to the plan that we had before, which was that, you have your real estate agent your insurance agent that set you up with a plan when we were a small store in 1970 doing $100,000 a year, and they had annual escalation clauses, but it wasn't near the policy as far as protecting him as this new policy was. For instance, when this fire completely wiped him out, it not only gave him guaranteed income for the 7 months, but it paid for 18 out of his 20 key employees at full wage so that he wouldn't lose them. It completely rebuilt his store for him. Now, it can happen to anybody, and I've heard horror stories of somebody losing their store to a fire. So if you don't know exactly what your insurance policy is doing, I can tell you that just learning that one point and acting on it in this seminar can save you down the road maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars by making sure your policy has a good income guarantee protection plan for not only you but your employees, because you got to keep them around. You spent a long time developing these employees, and it turned out the arson was another competing health food store in town, because he burnt his own store down after our store was rebuilt, because he thought by burning ours down he was going to do a great job, but he didn't. And he burnt his own store down. And the MO was kind of interesting, because at both stores, the guy wasn't very smart. At both stores, he left a dustpan and they found remnants of arrows at both stores. Turns out the guy used a dustpan to hold up against the door and pour gasoline into both of the stores, and went back into his car and shot a flaming arrow into the thing. But not realizing that any inspector would think, well, if you are that good of an archer, you would have your own arrows that are made for you, and everybody has their own custom configuration of the quiver, feathers on the back. So they went to his apartment and they got a search warrant, and there was a quiver of arrows, the exact arrows that were found at both the other places. So anyway, it's a sad state that man is in that he would do that to destroy two people's businesses. But ours is redone and is rebuilt, and we're fine. But if it wasn't for that insurance policy, it would have been a disaster. So the bottom line on making money is this: that you should know your financial health at all times, not just at the end of the year when you hear from your accountant, but every month you ought to know exactly what your financial health is. If I was to walk in your store and say, "How are we doing?" you say, "This is my gross profit margin. This is my net profit margin. This is my shrink," and those are the numbers that are important. I do a lot, yes. Okay, shrink. Good question. What shrink is you buy products. You're going to buy merchandise, and say you spend $2 on the merchandise, right? And then you sell it, you have a markup. You have a markup of $1, and you're going to sell it for $3. Just to make it real easy. Now, if we add zeros after this, say you bought $2,000 worth of merchandise, you figure you're going to mark it up $1,000, and you're going to have $3,000 of the merchandise left. So you've taken your inventory before, and you found that you start with $1,000 worth of merchandise with your beginning inventory, and you bought $2,000, and say you sold and you marked it up to $3,000. You start with $1,000 of inventory. You essentially sold $3,000 worth of this inventory, and you're expecting to have $1,000 left over that you started with. $1,000 you bought and sold this, and you're expecting to have $1,000 left over. When you actually count this, you find out that you've got $800 in merchandise left. This is called shrink. There's $200 in merchandise that shrunk off of your shelf, either from pilferage, or it was improperly marked, or there was some, shrink can be in many forms. Now, usually an acceptable shrink, 0.5% is kind of an acceptable shrink level for me. Some people accept 1%, some people accept 3%, but for me, I think 0.5% is all I really feel comfortable with living with. Meaning that when I get down to taking my physical inventory, if it's not within this, then I start asking some questions about where that went. And for instance, I have one client who has 5 stores, and 4 of the stores have a gross profit margin. Every time he takes a physical inventory, a gross profit margin. He's a vitamin-oriented store, so there's a 41% gross profit margin on 4 of these stores. His 6th store has a 36% gross profit margin, 5 percentage points less. So I said, okay, it sounds like we've got a problem. We've got a shrink problem of 5% here, because it should be the same as all the other stores. So we said, what first we're going to do is we're going to go in and say we don't accuse anybody because we don't know where it's coming from. But we for one, too many of us don't talk to our employees, and it's like there's an elephant in the room and nobody wants to talk about it. Well, we've got this big elephant here of 5%. And a 5% of a gross, if you're doing $500,000, is $25,000, which is what this man was losing a year, $25,000 a year. So I said, this is how we handle it. We want to make the statement to everybody that we have an inventory control problem. There's merchandise leaving the store that's not being rung up. And so to do this, we're going to take a physical inventory once a month. Number two is if this doesn't, and we're going to watch our markups. Number two, we're going to write down everything that we throw out or discard. And this is a shrink list. In the back of the room, you have a shrink list. So when you have a yogurt or you have that's outdated, you're going to throw it out, then you write it down here. Okay, there was $1 yogurt we sold that we threw out. A bottle of vitamins cracked, and you threw it out. That was $6. At the end of each month, you're going to know exactly what your accountable shrink is. So your accountable shrink is everything you have a list of, so you can say when you get your books back, okay, I can account for 0.25% because this is merchandise I took home. This was merchandise that we threw out. Now the unaccountable shrink in is where somebody took it off the shelves. Now, if that doesn't do it, taking a physical inventory for a month, for 3 months in a row, then what we're going to do is we're going to bring in security cameras. And you can get two cameras and a monitor for $500. And I can tell you, putting a security camera over both of your registers and another couple throughout your store has a way of keeping a lot of people very honest. Just the fact that they're going up there. Now, in this situation with my client, 2 days after he announced that he was going to have these monthly accounting sessions, monthly inventory sessions, his top 2 employees left. They'd been with him for 3 years. They just resigned. They were with him for 3 years. They got $75,000 out of him. They just resigned. So we don't accuse anybody. It was just like, we have a problem, and we're going to count merchandise once a month. Just the fact they know you're looking at the problem now can sometimes do that. And we're going to bring in security cameras. And if that doesn't do it, then what we can do is we can put videotapes in and record what's happening every day. And so we'll find out, what's happening here. So if you need to get that strict, you can. You can. $90 answer to shrink, but it still can, maybe you can learn something out of it.
If you identify some employee listing products, is there any, what are suggested ways of handling that? Any ways of going to report?
No. You have to be very, very careful with the laws of the United States on doing this. You have to give them in writing. Make sure it's in writing and you keep a copy of it. And deliver the notice to them in writing that you have observed this. And if it's observed again, then they will lose their job. You cannot try to get anything back from them. You just can't. It's better to just actually go through the steps of this is what we're doing. We're taking physical inventories. We're going to bring in the cameras. And if they know that this is going on, they're going to leave. They're going to leave. See, but so many people are out there. There is I'll tell you, it's so common in co-ops. I can't believe you, the amount of co-ops that pilferage goes on amongst the employees because they got this feeling, co-ops are doing 3, 4, 5, 10 million. It sets such a relaxed atmosphere that their shrink level is extremely high. People feel it's okay to just take stuff because there's a lot of money floating around. They're doing a high volume. But, you need to make your employees accountable that way. For one, employees should never check themselves out. I don't care what size store you have, an employee should never check themselves out because when you start with just 1 or 2 employees, it gets to a point where you have 5 or 6, and if they're all checking themselves out, an employee can very easily rationalize at the end of a busy day, gosh, I put in a lot of hours, I was really busy today. It's very easy just to ring up 9 out of those 10 items and feel okay, I can justify doing it. So you never let an employee check themselves out. They always check out to somebody else. But you've got to write it down, set them a note, and keep a copy of that so that if you do fire them for that you've got record that you've given notice and it's on file. So,
Really fire them if you catch them in the act.
on the spot, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it. Right now, they have everything goes for the thief in this country, and there are too many cases now where people have been fired. So you have to prove it for one, and trying to prove that in the court of law, unless you basically have a videotape and their admission, is about the only way you can do it.
This concludes the program on side 2. The workshop continues on tape number 3.